Hello, my name is Jason, aka Bacon Chest, and welcome to CPC Week 0 Power Rankings. This is for the Majors. I may also do a Minors Power Rankings video once their draft is finished. So CPC is the Continental Pokemon Championship. I joined this league last season in Season 7. Found it a lot of fun, good people, well-run league, and they also have recording incentives for draft positions in future seasons, so why not? I thought, why not get a video recorded. So we're going to be going through power rankings. There are 16 teams. This was a points-based draft. I think it was 120 points. You get 2 Z users. One can be any, come from any points tier, and one has to be a 9-point or below mon. There were previously restrictions on what kinds of Z moves you could use, but this season it's both the Z users can use all Z moves. I think that's about all we need to know before we get into the power rankings. So, at number 16, we have Intermalantic PC, coached by Burigo. So, this is probably, I think generally these teams are quite strong. And I think that even teams that I've ranked 13, 14, 15 are going to be able to compete week on week. This is probably the one exception to that. I think there are some good mons here, but I think overall it's maybe lacking in a bit of the power that a lot of the other teams have. And you can see that in terms of my offensive ratings that I've given the team. I thought that the breaking power is a little bit lacking outside of basically Mega Gallade. And then the sweeping power, there's not really much there outside of Talonflame that's going to be able to consistently outspeed opposing Scarfers, consistently break through, so consistently set up and break through opposing teams. There are pretty good removal options in the forms of Hydreigon, Gligar, and what have we got? Dhelmise, Scizor, and Florgs. So yeah, quite good removal. But the hazard game is also really weak. The fact that Gligar and Mesprit are the only hazard setters, they only carry rocks, and neither of them are particularly mons that you want to be bringing week in, week out. Gligar obviously they're both very knockoff weak as well, so the fact that both hazard setters share a kind of weakness, obviously Gligar not being weak to knockoff, but losing its Violite really limits its effectiveness. And so, yeah, I think that's a definite weakness on the part of this squad. On the other hand, whilst the bulk is not great, none of these mons are individually super bulky, with the exception of Vaporeon, really. Florgs obviously has good special bulk, but not really particularly great all-round bulk. But the longevity here is quite good. That's probably the big strength of the squad. So between Florgs and Vaporeon, you've got 2 Wish Passes, 2 Clerics, and just, mons that can eat up attacks for quite a while, and that'll really help support the rest of the team, which I think it's definitely going to need. Particularly, yeah, as I said, Talonflame being one of the bigger offensive threats, the fact that there's pretty good removal for that, so that's good support, which is nice, and yeah, otherwise, I think this team, yeah, possibly I was being a little harsh on it at first, but I do just think offensively, this team is going to struggle to break down a lot of the fatter teams that we're going to get into later on. So, moving on to the next team, we have the Miami Malamalans, coached by Tone. And if we look at this team, so obviously the first thing you probably notice is the Tapu Lele. So can't have Z moves, which obviously limits it a little bit in terms of being able to break past its checks with things like Z Focus Blast. But obviously still going to be a huge threat, and particularly the Lele Lucha core will pick up some KOs, probably pick up some wins, just having those 2 mons in the team. Outside of that, though, I think that the bulk of this team is a little bit lacking. So you've got things like Ferrothorn, and I guess Ferrothorn, Megateetar, and then Goodra, which I don't think is particularly amazing bulk. There's obviously a big fighting weakness there with Megateetar plus Ferrothorn, and that's not really mitigated. I guess you've got Lele, but Lele's not super bulky, and you don't really want to be switching it in repeatedly to take hits, particularly if you're running a spec set. And then, obviously like Gengar, immune to fighting attacks, but you're not switching it in on most fighting types because you're not switching it in on most offensive Pokemon in general. And so, yeah, I think the team is a little lacking in that respect. The other thing here is that I've rated the removal quite low. Why is that? So, Hawlucha, Gliscor, Volcanion's not a real Defogger. Yeah, so I think like Hawlucha and Gliscor, obviously, yeah, they're both neutral to rocks, which isn't too bad. But the fact that that's putting a lot of pressure on Gliscor if you're having it as removal, in addition to it being one of the few hazard setters on the team, and obviously both of them being flying types, being weak to ice. Again, your opponent can make sure that if they're trying to pressure you to stop you from moving, they just need to have an ice type move on whatever Pokemon is in, and then that's really, really going to create a bit of a struggle for you to be able to get removal going. That said, pretty decent hazard setters, so like very reliable ones like Ferrothorn and Megatetar is pretty reliable, and obviously Gliscor itself, yeah, very, very reliable hazard setter, so that's good. And there's a bit of momentum there with like Gliscor, Hawlucha, and Electros to like bring in Lele, which is really what you want, like particularly with Lele and Gengar, both ones that you don't really want to be taking hits with. You want to be getting them in for free as much as possible. So yeah, I think again this team's okay. I think the fact that you're gonna be wanting to bring those offensive monsters in as much as possible, but it's going to be a little bit of a struggle to do so, given that the removal is pretty lacking, and also that there's not necessarily those bulky mons that can consistently take hits. I do think this team might struggle a little bit in that respect. But that said, yeah, obviously very good sweeping core with Lele Lucha. Megatetar is a really, really threatening Dragon Dancer, so that's really good. And there's a reasonable amount of breaking power with like obviously things like Specs Lele, and then like Durant and Gengar can also break open teams if they've got boosting items reasonably well. So yeah, as I said, I think this is probably significantly better than the 16 ranked team, and I think yeah, we'll see as we move along how it compares to the ones above it. So moving on to number 14. So this is the Jump City Hitmonlees, coached by Carson, who's I believe new to the league. I'm not sure if he was in previous seasons, like before I was around. But yeah, he's drafted a really interesting team. I like some aspects of this team, and I really don't like other aspects. So you see that he's got the Volcarona, which is obviously a huge, huge sweeping threat. I am interested that he decided not to put a Z, make that one of his Z captains. I think, obviously, Kieran Black, excellent Z user, and it was a bit of a tough choice between those two for your like primary expensive Z user. But yeah, I think that is going to limit the Volcarona a bit. I mean, you'll see when we get to my team that I had a similar kind of choice to make in terms of whether or not to give it to probably the overall better Mon, or give it to the Mon that really, really benefits from Z usage in terms of trying to sweep. That's it. Let's talk about the rest of the team. So the thing with this team is, yeah, very, very good breaking power. Obviously, you've got any team with a Kieran Black and a Hooper Unbound, and a Diggersby and a Honchkrow is going to be able to break through most defensive cores pretty easily. So that's really good. I think the sweeping potential, obviously you've got the Volcarona. Outside of that, like you can do fun things with like Trick Room Hooper. Obviously Honchkrow can like Moxie boost past some teams. But aside from that, it's a little bit limited. The hazard game is good. You've got access to webs through Arachnid, which is always nice. Diggersby is obviously a pretty mediocre spike setter. It tends to want to be breaking or like being used as a scarfer to clean late game rather than running spikes, but if you can get them up, then like, obviously that can be a lot of help. The main thing, yeah, I didn't really like the removal options here. So you've got obviously Defog Volcarona, never ever is that going to be run. Rotom-Wash, good defogger, so that's good. But then aside from that, you've pretty much got Claydol as a spinner, which, Claydol's a pretty bad spinner. It just has so many common weaknesses. And and is, yeah, just going to really struggle with... I mean, at 75, I guess it is always faster than I think. I always think Claydol's going to be like 40 speed. So I guess it can outspeed some of the slower hazard setters, so that's nice. But, yeah, aside from that, I think, Claydol, not a great mon. Longevity is also going to be a real struggle for it. And... yeah, so the fact that that's one of the very few hazard setters, in fact it's the only rocker on the team, and it's the spinner, and it's not a mon that I would want to be bringing every week, is, yeah, I think a real detriment to this team. And particularly given that you're running Volcarona, every time you want to run Volcarona, you're pretty much going to have to bring Claydol or Defog Rotom, which limits what you can do with your Rotom. And, I mean, obviously, yeah, Volcarona plus Rotom is okay, but then, yeah, if you are wanting to bring, for example, Webs on Araquanid or Spikes on Diggersby, which Webs on Araquanid would be really good for things like the Kyurem Black and the Hooper, like, they love web support, but if you're going to do that, you want Spin over Defog, which means that you're going to be coming back to Claydol, so it's, like, Thanos style, like, where did it end you? Back to me. And it's just Claydol there. And that's not great. So, yeah, that's probably the main thing I think that's holding this team back. I did mention before, a couple of teams I think have already made transactions that'll be in effect for week 2. I don't know if this is one of them. But I haven't taken those into consideration. I'm just ranking based on how the teams were drafted, how they're going to be during week 1. So, let's move on to the team in number 13, which is the San Antonio Sparks, coached by Will, who I'm almost certain was in the league before I was around, but has now come back. And he's got a really interesting team. So he's got another one of those very, very powerful mons that were unbanned, or at least allowed in this league, where in other leagues they may not be, in the form of Landoi. And the breaking core there of Landoi plus Mega Medicham is going to be very, very threatening. I do think outside of that, there's a little bit of a lack of immediate power. You've got, obviously, Tyrantrum, which is a bit more of a niche threat. But then, stuff like Starmie, Sneasel, Scolipede, Comfey, Silvally Heatran, all those can do damage. Some of them can set up to do more damage, but none of them are things that I immediately think, oh god, I have to, run away from those mons. The sweeping potential, I was actually looking at this before, because I wrote all of these notes last week, and was looking back over them this morning. I think I was probably a little harsh on the sweeping potential. Z Scolipede with Speed Boost plus Swords Dance is quite a threatening sweeper. Calm Mind or Rock Polish or both. Lando is quite good. Calm Mind Comfey is good. And obviously Dragon Dance Tyrantrum is good as well. So yeah, there's actually a reasonable amount of sweeping potential here, so that's good. The hazards, so rocks on Lando, rocks on Heatran, rocks on Stunfisk, the god. That's actually pretty good. And once again, I think I may have actually been a little bit overly harsh on this team. May have probably deserved a slightly higher rank. But I do think that the bulk is a little bit lacking here. So what? Stuff like Comfey, obviously has amazing healing, but not necessarily as naturally bulky, isn't necessarily going to take neutral hits all that well. And I think that's the case for a lot of these kind of mons. Aside from probably Heatran, which is genuinely a very, very bulky mon. Things like Starmie, I've tried to use Starmie as a spinner before, and I just find that you just don't take even resisted hits all that well, particularly on the physical side, but yeah, I find that mon a little bit underwhelming defensively, and I think, it may have to be used defensively here, because there's not necessarily that many bulky mons on the team, so I think that's not great. But aside from that, obviously Landoi, huge threat, and there's a bit of momentum there with Lando, Comfey, and Decidueye, which is always good because you want that to bring in things like the Mega Medicham. Probably could have used a better electric type in order to have a bit more offensive pressure when you're building up the momentum with Volt Switch rather than just U-turn, because obviously none of those mons are... You could run offensive Decidueye, and you might run physical Landorus sometimes, but generally your U-turn's not going to be putting on much damage onto your opponent's team, which is always, if you can have mons stuff like Mega Beedrill that really, its U-turn is not only giving you momentum, but also putting big damage on the opposing team, that can be a lot better in terms of setting up for things like Mega Medi to sweep in the late game. So, I mean, obviously you wouldn't run, you wouldn't have Mega Medi and Mega B on the same team, but you get what I mean. So, yeah, that's Will's team, San Antonio Sparse, ranked in 13th. Moving on to 12, we have the Rhine Valley Guardians, coached by Risepool. This is our first playoffs coach from last season. He went 7-3, lost in the quarterfinals, and he's drafted a team that I actually really like. Like, I want this team, but I don't necessarily. I think it does have a couple of problems that keep it from being considered one of the absolute strongest teams. So the top 6 here are great. Weavile, Taunty, Keldeo, Garchomp, Mega Gardevoir, Roserade. Amazing breaking power. Like, Mega Gardevoir, Garchomp, Keldeo are all really, really good at breaking down opposing teams. And Weavile is as well. And then Taunty, unfortunately not Z on the Taunty. He chose to give it to the Garchomp, which obviously both amazing Z users. I do think having Z on Taunty I just find so helpful, so you don't have to rely on Hurricane misses. But hey, if you're a lucky player, then you'll just hit them anyway. So then you don't need the Z move. That said, yeah, so really, really good breaking power. I do think the sweeping power is a little bit lesser in comparison, and that kind of leads into my main criticism of this team, is that it's very linear. So, like, all of these Mons, I can kind of know exactly what they're going to be doing before the game starts. That's maybe not true of Roserade, which can effectively run both a defensive and an offensive set. And, you know, like, I guess it's to some extent true of, like, stuff like Taunty, but the thing with Taunty is, regardless of whether or not it's defensive or offensive, you're kind of dealing with it in a similar way. And then, you know, Garchomp, Mega Gardevoir, like, yeah, you can run them bulky, but once again, it's just kind of like, okay, I know what these Mons are going to do. I know what, like, handful of moves they're going to be running. I know what coverage they're going to have to run to deal with my team. And yeah, I just don't think there's that much flexibility in this team, which is something I don't like about it. And yeah, generally, sweeping potential, like, I guess, like, Swords Dance Weavile, or, like, Calm Mind Mega Guard, but you're not getting those, like, Quiver Dances, or Dragon Dances, or even, like, Beast Boost or Moxie users. Like, the lack of something that can really build up momentum, and that your opponent will have to dedicate specific resources to try and stop, is a problem, in my opinion. That said, really good regen core with Taunty plus Slowbro. I do think, aside from those, though, there is a little bit of lacking in longevity. I was maybe being a little bit harsh to give it a 5, but I just think that Mega Gardevoir, not a great cleric, and outside of that, there's not a huge amount of support for those Mons. Which could lead to them being worn down by, like, bulky teams spamming Toxic. Otherwise, good rockers. Garchomp, Palisand, Bronzong, that's a really strong set of stealth rockers, and Roserade, obviously really good exponent of spikes and T-spikes, especially with the sleep powder to potentially give it free turns. So yeah, I think this is where we're starting to get into teams that, like, I would happily trade for my team, and, you know, wouldn't feel like I was being, you know, wouldn't feel like I'd lost all that much. So, speaking of my team, ranked at 11, we have the St Kilda Superiors, coached by me, Bacon Chest. Once again, I may be being a little bit harsh on my own team here, but we'll see. I didn't want to, you know, put it up in the top 5 of the power rankings or something, and then, you know, lose a couple of games and be like, well, okay, I guess the team was shit, or maybe I'm shit. I don't know. But the thing I like about this team, based on how I drafted it, is, I mean, the top couple of Mons, so, like, Mega Diancie and Zygarde 50, obviously huge threats in the draft format, so really, really glad that, even though I had a fairly late draft position, I think I was, I want to say, like, pick 12 or something like that, the fact that I was able to get both of those on the same team is really, really nice. That said, what are the problems with this team? The main problems with this team are actually, yeah, like the hazards and removal. So I wasn't able to necessarily pick up a bunch of good Stealth Rockers as the draft wore on. I did get a couple of really good ones. So obviously, like Mega Dancy, very good offensive rock setter. Empoleon, really, really good bulky rock setter. Obviously, MV's like popularized the idea of Empoleon as best defogger. I probably took that a little bit too much to heart when I was drafting, because it's literally, aside from Swellow, which again a bit of a meme defogger, it's my only removal, which I don't find necessarily is that bad of a thing. I haven't drafted a team that's particularly weak to hazards. Like we've got like Arcanine and Glalie, which are not mons that I'm going to bring every single week, and Swellow, which is another mon that I probably won't bring every week. And they're not mons that are particularly hurt, aside from Arcanine. Arcanine's probably the main one that needs hazards off the field to operate effectively in a defensive sense, but stuff like Glalie and Swellow, more offensive mons, don't really care about it too much. But yeah, I do think that, overall, it is to the detriment of the team that there isn't as much hazard removal. I do have a grounded poison, which is nice, so T-Spikes aren't that big of a threat. And Drapeon's like pretty good. Grounded Poison, I really like Drapeon. I really like using it. Where have I used it? I've used it definitely had it in ICBA D-League, I think. And I've had it a couple of times since. But I'm not sure I've had a full season with it, for a while. So, hopefully that'll be fun. Reuniclus, is the other mon that I really like on this team, and I think it completes a good set of setup sweepers that give me good versatility. So obviously, like Mega Diancie can use like Rock Polish, Calm Mind. Zygarde can have the Dragon Dance, and Reuniclus can do the like Trick Room, Calm Mind sweeping. And then also the other mon, and this is something I referenced a little bit earlier. Other good setup sweeper there is Xurkitree. Now obviously it would have been great to be able to put a Z captain onto Xurkitree, but I just thought I may not bring it every week, and I'd rather have a Z captain that I'm going to bring pretty much every week, so my opponent always has to be concerned in the game about the potential for a Z move, and so I decided to put it on Zygarde instead. Obviously, Zygarde's an excellent Z user, Z Outrage, and, Z, like any Grandium Z or Dragonium Z, both really, really good choices on it, but yeah, it would have been nice to have access to the Z Terrain or the Z Hypnosis on Xurkitree. But that's okay. I think we can still get a fair bit of use out of that thing. It's such a powerful mon. Can really clean up late game with the Beast Boost. And I think it'll put in a lot of work against the like slower, bulkier teams further up the rankings. So hopefully we'll be able to put in some work with that. And then aside from that, I think it's got decent sweeping, decent bulk, but I do think it's maybe a little bit lacking in longevity. And like I've got the one regenerator in the form of Reuniclus, but like I think I did okay with this draft. I wasn't really paying attention to everyone else's drafts until afterwards. I was just focusing on what I could get, and I sort of got to the end and was like, I'm pretty happy with this draft. And then I looked at some of the others and I was like, I could be happier. And speaking of, let's move up the rankings. So let's go to number 10. This is KHD. This is D-League coach from last season, who went 8-2 and lost in the final. So obviously had a really, really high quality season. And he's drafted the Mega Beedrill, which is always a fun mon. I don't necessarily rate it as a Mega, but like I think the fact that he's got some really, really high quality mons aside from that, and around it, should work out okay. So that is to say, there's a Celesteela there and a Latios, which are both very, very high quality. And then I'm trying to figure out. It's a little bit hard with the white text to see which Monster Z uses. I believe it's Azumarill and Zangoose, which, this is the team that has made transactions for week 2. I'm fairly certain he is switching. He's going to have a Sandcore with, I want to say, Stoutland, after week 1, in place of the Zangoose, I believe. But for the moment, this is what we're looking at. I don't think that necessarily would change my opinion of that team too much. Obviously, Stoutland would grant an Intimidator and a little bit more bulk, as well as a more, a more flexible sweeping option in the sand. So that is quite good. But I don't think it would fundamentally change how I think about the team. So what do I think about this team? I think that it is has good sweeping potential. with things like Latios, things like Celesteela, and obviously Z Azumarill is a really good and potent sweeper that everyone has to be concerned about, so that's really good. The removal is really strong. Yeah, Sarina is a pretty solid spinner, and then you've got Defog Lati, obviously a very, very high quality defogger, and Mandibuzz as well. So Mandibuzz and Latios probably two of the top 10, I would say, probably defoggers. Certainly like top 15 in the format. And so, you know, to have both those mons on the same squad, you've got good removal there, which is nice because you do want that for Mega Beedrill and also for Rotom Heat, which the thing that always turns me off drafting Rotom Heat is that Rocks weakness, because I find that its main role is that it has such a good typing for defensively checking certain threats. So like the obviously one that people use it for fairly often is Magearna, which wasn't available in this league. Oh, is it? We'll see. We'll see if I find a Magearna later on. I can't actually remember off the top of my head right now. But we'll see if there's a Magearna score later on. But yeah, it checks other threats like that. Yeah, like offensive fairies and offensive steals and things like that. But if you can't keep rocks off the field, it's a real struggle, and a lot of people end up drafting Rotom Heat as one of their only defoggers, which I just find like baffling. But in this case, we have Mandibuzz, Latios, Sarina, so some really solid removal support for the Rotom Heat, so that's really nice. Also really good for Celesteela, which I find, particularly for running an offensive Stealer, it can almost always tank a hit from full. But if you have taken those couple of rock switch-ins, or like a little bit of chip, that little bit of extra chip that rocks can provide, then you're not going to be able to take those, like, you know, Thunderbolts, or you're not going to be able to take a hit, set up, kill something, and then survive the priority that comes in afterwards. So I think, yeah, that's really solid. The sand here is a little annoying, although I guess... Yeah, no, I mean, it's fine for the Celesteela, obviously. I believe Mandibuzz has Overcoat, so that is also fine in that respect. So, yeah, okay, no, that's good, because that means your two premier bulky mons in the forms of Mandibuzz and Celesteela, outside of the Hippowdon, aren't getting negatively impacted in their ability to be bulky by the Hippowdon itself. So that's really nice. And, yeah, some good offensive threats, like Lycanroc Dusk, Latios... the Celesteela itself is obviously a big offensive threat sometimes, although the fact that there's no Z usage on the Celesteela is interesting. I probably would have put that over the Azumarill, personally. But, you know, I know that people love that Azumarill, the Z Bellydrum Azumarill set, so, yeah, like, obviously that can be a huge set. I'll probably get swept by it later this season. I don't actually know if I'm playing KHD at any point in the schedule, but we'll see. Yeah, no, pretty solid team, and we're starting to get, like, we're up to 10 now, and I think, like, all the teams from here, yeah, like, I'd be perfectly happy with. I'm probably not roasting you guys as much as you're looking for, but, you know, I think this is a pretty good team. I think most of the teams are pretty good. So, moving on to number 9, we have the Dayton Dittos, coached by Henry, who went 5-5 in the D-League last season, but did make it to the semis, so, obviously had a, you know, kind of a mixed bag this season. This team is really, really simple. Reminds me a lot of the team that we were... What was... hang on, I'm just going to go back. Yeah, reminds me a lot of the Rhine Valley Guardians squad from earlier, where it's pretty simple. There's not a huge amount going on with it, but it looks pretty effective. The main reason this gets a slightly higher mark is I think the hazards here are quite good. Like, they're pretty limited. Like, as you can see, it hasn't drafted that many mons, but the ones he has drafted are really good. So things like Skarmory, Nidoking, and Uxie, they're all mons that I would be happy to bring almost every week, and they're all mons that are pretty reliable at getting up their hazards. So that's really good. You've also got good momentum from Uxie, from Skarm, and from Zapdos, which is really, really nice. That's especially good support for things like Blacephalon and Kyurem, which are going to break apart teams. The only thing here that's not great is probably the sweeping potential. You've got Blacephalon and Mega Lopunny, which can both sweep, but they're both not amazing at it. In that Blacephalon's not quite fast enough to outspeed things like base 110s, unless you're putting a Scarf on it, and obviously, like, once you put a Scarf on something, it becomes easier to check in terms of, you know, Fire or Ghost. Ghost is a pretty good type for breaking through teams like that. But Fire tends to not be so much because bulky waters are so common. But yeah, Mega Lopunny can clean up teams. It's a really, really good mon. I have used it really poorly, and I've used it really well in different leagues. I think this team looks like it supports it pretty well. And the presence of the Tapu Bulu is actually really nice. That's really good. It's amazing for Nidoking, because obviously it doesn't impact Nidoking's premier stab move in the form of Earth Power, but it does help keep Nidoking alive, which is one of those things that, like, things like Nidoking Blastoise and Kyurem can all be quite bulky mons. Like, they're all naturally quite bulky, and the fact that they've got that grassy terrain support is really, really nice. Like, in conjunction with Leftovers or Black Sludge, that will keep those things alive for a lot longer than they otherwise would be. But yeah, sweeping potential outside of those top two, you've got Crawdont at the bottom, which is a bit of a niche Dragon Dance sweeper. Probably not going to pick up many sweeps with it, but the fact that it does have access to a very powerful Aqua-Jet, and you can potentially Swords Dance Aqua-Jet, is always really, really nice. So yeah, I think this team is, overall quite solid. Doesn't have as many options, and just the fact that, I can be... Well, whilst all of the mons are good, it's going to be a bit easier to be confident about what your opponent is bringing when they just physically have less mons available. The other thing is the speed tiers are pretty, like, the fact that you've got Kyurem, Uxie, Nidoking all in that same kind of bracket, and then, like, Blastoise, Bulu, Skarmory all in that same kind of bracket, is not as good, and there's obviously quite a big gap between Blacephalon and Megalopunny. So, if I'm running a Scarf 110, base 110, then I know that I'm outspeeding everything on this team, which is obviously something that's very, very useful, particularly when, like, outside of Crawdont and Lop, and then I've written Blastoise as priority, but, like, I mean, I have run Aqua-Jet on Blastoise before, I think, but it's not a hugely common set. But yeah, if you've got something that won't get revenged by Mega Lopunny because it's resistant to normal, for example, you can really go ham on this team. But yeah, we'll see how well Henry goes at mitigating that. And, it does have a lot of really fun mons. Like, I really enjoyed, I think I had Kyurem last season, really enjoyed using it. Mega Lopunny, always a fun mon. And things like Nidoking will just break apart teams. So yeah, pretty good. Moving on, we've got the Toronto Tyranitar's, coached by Blitz, who went 7-3 last season, lost in the semi-finals. So had, really solid season overall. And he's drafted a really strange team. It's full of mons that I don't generally use, which made me initially sort of kind of down on it, just because it looked odd, and there's another team further up the rankings that is even more strange looking. But I think it is quite a good team overall. So you've got the Megaladios and the Kartana, so two really, really big offensive threats. Both can potentially sweep through teams, so that's really good. I do think outside of the Kartana, though, I guess you've got Kartana and Staraptor for immediate power, and then, like, Conkeldurr, I guess, as well, grants a bit of immediate power, but I think the fact that you've got things like Jolteon, Megaladios, which, whilst it is a very powerful mon, the fact that it can't run boosting items does sometimes limit its ability to break through teams without boosts. And, stuff like Suicune, Togekiss, like a Alolan Muck, none of that's, like, things that are going to break apart teams and really force openings for a late game sweep. But that said, there's some very good late game sweepers here that probably don't need huge openings to really put the work on a lot of teams. So, I do think it's overall quite strong, but yeah, I do think that is slightly a weakness in terms of breaking power. The other thing is their hazards are pretty bad. We've got Steelix and Donphan. Donphan's pretty good, but once again, it's that same thing that I've mentioned with a couple of squads earlier, where they're both weak to water, which means that, if you've got a mon with water-type moves, you can really stop, you can own that lead matchup a lot more effectively, which is never something that I'm a huge fan of. Admittedly, I've done the exact same thing with my team, where I've got Empoleon and Diancie, which are both weak to ground, but, like, I do as I say, not as I do, basically. So, yeah, no, I think the hazards are probably the big weak point. I really rate having access to spikes or T-spikes. Like, I don't rate as much having access to webs, but it is obviously a real good point of, utility as a strategy to have access to. And yeah, having two rockers, very similar typing, both slow as well. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of that. On the other hand, the removal is really good. Megaladios doesn't really want to be running defog most of the time, but like it can, and it's very good at it. Togekiss, great defogger. Donphan, pretty solid spinner. So that's good, although I question the necessity of that really when you've only got Togekiss being weak to rocks. Oh, and Staraptor. I guess for Staraptor that's actually good because it doesn't want to take additional damage on top of already, damaging itself with recoil. So that, yeah, like it support. I guess the team supports Staraptor quite well, but I question whether that was super necessary in comparison to maybe getting access to different forms of hazards, and maybe a different kind of hazard setter aside from just a slow, bulky mon that's weak to water. But aside from that, I think this team is very strong, and if Blitz can get the most out of Donphan and Steelix, then as rockers, then I mean this team's going to go real far. Like sweeping potential with things like Suicune, even one of those like slower, bulkier, calm Minesweepers, but can be really, really hard to stop once it gets going. So yeah, pretty solid team. So next we move on to the Oakland Azelfs, coached by Psychedelic Scizor, who had a pretty poor season last season, but I think from memory I wasn't a huge fan of his team last season, but this team's quite threatening. It's a really fun looking team. So you've got the top three, which are really like frail, but very offensively powerful with a lot of utility. So Ribombee obviously giving access to the webs, Azelf to the rocks, Infernape also to the rocks. So you've got three offensive fast hazard setters, and then you've got like further down you've got things like Blissey and Crocodile and Garbodor that give you those slower, bulkier hazard setters. So there's a lot of and this is like in a stark contrast, I guess, to the previous team we were talking about. You've got a variety of hazard setters that all sort of offer different things and different ways of setting up hazards, whether that's because they're faster or whether that's because they impose a lot of offensive pressure. So yeah, I give this team a 10 out of 10 for hazards because it's got access to all of them, and it's got access to them in different forms at different speed tiers. Yeah, it's really cool. Unfortunately, the removal's really bad, which is kind of crap. Like the fact that you've got like Mega Altaria, Braviary, is that literally it? I guess Ribombee also has access to defog. This team really could have used something like a Fortress or a Donphan or something like that. Because obviously you don't necessarily want to be defogging very much when you've got webs and spikes and T-spikes access. The other issue, I guess, is that I talked. The flip side of the fact that you've got Ribombee, Azelf, and Infernape is that the team is a little bit frail, particularly if you bring like 2 or 3 of those mons. You are maybe going to be struggling a little bit to tank hits. Oh, hang on. Sorry. Went one forward. Particularly physical hits, like, I guess you've got Crook. Oh, and the other thing is that I haven't even talked about yet is that we do have the unbanned Aegislash, which can't carry Z-moves, but is still going to be a huge, huge threat, and does give the team, just a really good variety of sweeping options. So, like, the fact that you've got Aegislash as a kind of a slow Swords Dance sweeper, you've got Manaphy with Z-move access, so you can run the Z Rain Dance or just Tail Glow, Infernape with like access to like Swords Dance, Mark Punch, Azelf with Nasty Plot, Ribombee with Quiver Dance, like some really, really good sweeping options here. That's outside of the Mega Altaria. So yeah, this team's got very, very good offensive presence, both in the early game with things like Infernape can be a really powerful one if you've got like Band or Specs. Even something like Magnezone, like that's some immediate power. Aegislash obviously offers a lot of immediate power. Crocodile if you run offensive. But the sweeping potential is really where it's at. There is a huge sweep. I mean, literally that entire top 7 mons and then Aegislash can all sweep in one way or the other. Whether it's Bulk Up with Braviary, whether it's Moxie, Scarf Moxie with Crocodile. Like, yeah, this team is going to clean, and I reckon it's going to have a lot of wins that look really cool. But I do think it might be a little bit frail and may fall apart against teams that bring the right defensive checks. So yeah, I think this is one of those teams that like could end up like 12 to 15, but it could also end up like top 4 depending on how Psych goes in terms of handling these mons. So yeah, we'll see. But I'm looking forward to it. I think the games with this team are going to be very exciting. So, moving on to number 6, which you already saw a little bit. This is Muse the Best and the Kentucky Fried Dragons. Muse didn't have a very good season last season, but we'll see how it goes this time around. This team's really cool. Again, another team with... this wasn't the one I was thinking of before, but another team with a bunch of ones that I haven't used very much. But I think... is probably going to go quite well. He's got the Tapu Fini, which I had last season, I believe, but I think he's done a better job of supporting it than I did. I think Tapu Fini with Mega Scizor is really nice. Mega Scizor not being Scald Burned is really good. Necrozma not getting Toxic, also really good. Obviously the Hitmonlee for a nice Unburdened sweeper, but the thing I like about Hitmonlee as opposed to other low-tier Unburdened sweepers, like basically anyone who's not named Hawlucha, is that it does offer utility outside of that. Like obviously it has Rapid Spin, which is not... it's not the best spinner, but the fact that it has access to priority, the fact that Reckless High Jump Kick can like put holes in teams, it's really, really good. And then yeah, really good hazard setters. So like 3 T-Spikers. I don't like that they're all offensive. Like Exelgor, Salazzle, Nihilego, none of them take hits, pretty much at all, let alone well. And so that's not great. But if you're willing to run that kind of suicide hazard lead, this team can really can do that very, very well in a variety of ways. So that's good. And what else about this team? Oh yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of the breaking potential. I think, yeah, because there's quite a bit of setup here. There's good setup potential with things like Thunderous T, with things like Nihilego, with things like Necrozma, Mega Scizor. Like, yeah, very good setup potential, but I do think the immediate power is a little bit lacking. I guess outside of Thunderous T, which can do both, get you a Thunderous who can do both, can sweep and break. But aside from that, yeah, it's a little bit lacking in immediate offensive presence. But if this team can survive the early game and get up hazards and whittle away, then it's going to have a really easy time cleaning up with even also just the fact that there's a Persian Alola with access to Z moves, so you can do the Z parting shot to bring something back. So that is actually pretty good in terms of allowing Thunderous T to potentially, for example, be used as a breaker and as a sweeper, or setting up really early with something like Virizion and trying to break and then being able to bring that back later. That's always really good. And Licky Licky as well, providing really good clerical support. I think that's really good. Yeah, the fact that you're able to afford to draft something like Licky Licky rather than one of the other bulky normals that gets access to rocks, because he'd already drafted a really good set of rockers like Necrozma and Aerodactyl and Nihilego. So yeah, no, I think this is a really solid team, and that's why I've ranked it in the top half. So we'll see if Muse can turn around some poor results from last season. So, now we're into the top 5, and pretty much all of these guys either did really well in playoffs last season, or did really well in the D-League. And it's kind of indicative of the fact that these guys, obviously they must be good coaches to have gotten that far, and also because of the incentives in terms of draft position, you get points for doing well in the season and also for uploading, and these are the guys who did well and uploaded, so they got good draft positions and they took advantage of them. And so the first of those, moving into number 5, is Brighton Bewares, coached by Evan. This is a really, really fun looking team. It's got some of my absolute all-time favourite mons like Mamoswine and Metagross, which is real good, and it's got the Mega Kangaskhan, which is obviously a very, very powerful threat. And yeah, as opposed to the previous team, this team is going to have no trouble breaking. It has, literally half the team is just physical breakers. So, Terrakion, Mega Kangaskhan, Mamoswine, Metagross are 4 of probably the best physical breakers that you could possibly draft. And they're all on the same team here, which is terrifying. I initially was going to be a little bit harsher on this team, just because it is very physically biased. You've pretty much got, Mew, Thunderous, I guess Whimsicott, but Whimsicott's not a huge offensive presence, and then, I guess Moltres, but once again, not something going to bring more than a couple of games in a season. There's not that much special attacking presence, but on the other hand, you've got all these physical attackers, they can break for each other, and not many teams are going to have the capacity to take them all on in a game. So I think might struggle a little bit with teams that have good physical bulk and good longevity, so that they can potentially sort of last out things like the Mamo and the Metagross and the Mega Kang, but a lot of teams just aren't going to be able to handle that kind of offensive presence. And yeah, like decent setup potential, double Prankster Mons with Whimsicott plus Thunderous, so that is always really helpful. Particularly like you can get things like T-Wave off, you can Whimsicott has Memento, that's it, not Parting Shot. But it does have Memento, so that's something that can really assist in terms of getting setup turns for things like Thundy, Tarak, and Mew. And speaking of which, I love the way that he drafted around Mew. Most people draft Mew and then they don't draft other good rockers and defoggers. This team admittedly is lacking a bit for defoggers, or hazard removal in general, like Whimsicott and Thunderous. I guess they both are very reliable at doing it, but surviving afterwards is a little bit questionable. So that's not great, but I do like that there's a lot of high quality rockers. Probably Mamoswine, Seismitoad, Metagross, it does have a little bit of that problem that I was referring to earlier about how they're all very similar. They're all in pretty much the exact same speed tier. They've got similar weaknesses, and they're all kind of doing the same thing. So that's not as good. But he does have on top of that, Terrakion plus Mew for faster rockers. And Quillfish is pretty decent Spiker and T-Spiker. So yeah, overall I think this team's really, really strong. And yeah, I think probably the only thing holding it back will be if he does want to bring, for example, the Moltres, then that does limit one of your faster offensive mons to being the Defogger, which is not great, but I think he'll be able to get past it. And the other thing I love about this team is, aside from the fact that there's two Prankster Mons, I'm a huge fan of having multiple sources of priority on a team, and this team has some really good ones with Mamo plus Metagross plus Mew. And Mega Kang as well, which not to forget the Mega Kang with Fake Out plus Sucker Punch. I think between the speed tiers and the priority, the fact that it caps out at 116 is not as big of an issue as it would be for other teams. Overall, really, really solid team. I think this could have been in the top 2. I think at this point, it's very, very close between these top 5. So moving on to number 4. So this is the Duke Blue Dwebbles, coached by Styx. Styx went 8-2 last season. I forgot to mention Evan, who went 5-5 in the regular season. He got into playoffs ahead of me on differential, and proceeded, after winning his last 3 games, proceeded to win quarters, win semis, and then make it to the final where he lost to Styx, coach of the Duke Blue Dwebbles, who was the winner of CPC Majors Season 7. And drafted a really offensive team, went pick 1, make Tapu Koko, as I believe he did last season as well. It's becoming a bit of a meme at this point, but obviously Tapu Koko, incredibly threatening mon. And he's got the potential for the terrain sweeping core with Koko and the Alolan Raichu. So, what do I like about this team? This team has the best hazards of any team I think I've ever seen in the draft format. Wow, I love this team's hazard setters so much. I want to marry them. Mega Aerodactyl, really, really good fast rocker that's bulky enough to actually tank a hit while it sets up rocks. Greninja threatens things out, can set up spikes and T-spikes, but the fact that that's not the only T-spiker, there's also a Nidoqueen in that sort of mid-speed tier, and being a bit bulkier, and then you've got a really, really bulky T-spiker in the form of Cofagrigus down the bottom. So, 3 T-spikers at very different speed tiers doing very different things. It's going to be really hard. If Styx wants to get up T-spikes against you, it's going to be really, really hard for you to stop him from doing that. So that's really good. And then, again, really good rockers. So I've already mentioned Mega Arrow, and then you've got Jirachi, and then you've got things like Nidoqueen and Swampert, both very, very reliable. So that's great. The removal is a bit less strong. Tapu Koko can run Defog, and it's not bad at it, but as with Mega Latios, when I was talking about that earlier, it's not something you want to be doing all that much. Rotom-Mow is a good defogger, but it's not necessarily a mon that you want to bring every week. And then Mega Arrow can defog, despite the fact that it's weak to rocks, it's actually still not a bad defogger. but similar to Tapu Koko, it's not what it really wants to be doing. So yeah, not necessarily the most ideal removal, but I mean, it's not like this team's even particularly weak to rocks. Like Mega Arrow plus Incineroar. So I guess if you're bringing both those mons, if you need both those mons in a matchup, then you are going to have to sacrifice a bit of offensive presence on Mega Arrow or Koko, or bring the Rotom-Mow, which is going to be it's going to be hard to fit on a lot of teams. I think that Styx builds, because it obviously already has the two electrics with Koko and Alolan Raichu. And so yeah, there might be a little bit of a logjam there, and that's probably the only thing keeping this from being the number one ranked team, I would say. Oh, and the other thing that's keeping it a little bit from being the number one ranked team is I do think it's a little bit lacking in initial power. So you've got, like, obviously Koko is quite powerful, but it can sometimes, because obviously like its attack and special attack stats, particularly its special attack, isn't actually that high. So if it is being forced to use moves that aren't T-Bolt or Wild Charge, then it can sometimes be a little bit underwhelming. And I'm saying this as someone who loves Tapu Koko. And then, you know, stuff like Greninja, Jirachi, Raichu, even in terrain, is like Raichu in terrain can break, which is nice, and Buzzwole can break, and Nidoqueen can break. But yeah, I do think overall there's a bunch of mons here that either tend to run sets that mean that they aren't actually that powerful, like things like Nidoqueen, like can be really powerful with Sheer Force Life Orb, but you don't actually often end up running Sheer Force Life Orb, I find, when you have Nidoqueen in a draft format. And so, yeah, there might be a little bit of lacking breaking, but the fact is that that's more than made up for by, as I've already said, the really strong hazard game, which means that he should be able to whittle down teams enough that he can sweep through them with Mega Arrow, having amazing speed advantage on everything else in the format, and then things like Koko with the Raichu, and Greninja, and yeah, having decent priority access with Greninja's Water Shuriken, and yeah, some good like bulk with good momentum. So things like Jirachi and Incineroar, the fact that they can come in, sponge hits, and then U-turn out and bring in those more offensive threats is really nice. But yeah, probably short one big offensive breaker that can just immediately snap a team in half. But that's like the most minute of criticisms. So yeah, that's the Duke Blue Dwebbles at number 4. So moving on to number 3. So we have, this is the Blackmont Raicougars, coached by Zamcro. Went 6-4 last season, lost in the semis, I believe, to Styx. And yeah, Scoot has drafted a really weird team. This is like, I initially was going to rate this like bottom 5 teams, because I just looked at it and was like, what are you doing? What is this team? Like, what even are half these mons? But the more I looked at it, the more I liked it. The removal here is incredible. As with Styx before, who, like, I've probably never seen a team with better hazards. I've probably never seen a team with better removal than this, to be perfectly honest, which is really good and necessary in this case, because he does have the Megazard X, which is an incredibly threatening mon if you can keep hazards off the field, particularly rocks. And yeah, like, you know, Defog Superior, Spin on Tentacruel, Defog on Lando T, even on Oricorio, which I know that Scoot absolutely loved using last season, so I imagine he will bring it again this season. And then yeah, Spin on Fortress as well. So yeah, multiple different forms of hazard removal at different speed tiers with different types. Yeah, he's going to have a pretty easy time keeping those hazards off the field, which is really nice for the Zardex. Really nice for the Oricorio as well, if that thing's trying to sweep. So yeah, that's really good. And then yeah, speaking of the sweeping potential of this team, oh my god. Superior, Megazard X, Lando T, Oricorio being able to steal sweeps off of people and dissuading you from using things like Quiver Dance and Dragon Dance, and Stakataka having access to the Trick Room. I really rate having a Dragon Dancer and a Trick Roomer on the same squad. I mean, you'll see that like I did that exact thing by having Rhinoculus and Zygarde, and so I like that template because it gives you so much ability to control the speed of the game. And yeah, probably lacking a little bit of momentum, which I'm not a huge fan of, given that the Zardex is there. Obviously, you've got things like the Electrode, the Fortress, the Orc, but like Electrode, Fortress, Oricorio, there are going to be weeks where you don't have any of those mons, and then you're only... Oh, I actually forgot to specify Lando T as having momentum. So yeah, Lando T being there and U-turning into Zardex is going to be really powerful, but aside from that, it is maybe lacking a little bit in that respect. And the other thing I said was longevity. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Sylveon. Like, Sylveon wish passes well for itself. I don't necessarily see it wish passing well for other mons as much. Um, but that said, there's still some decent longevity on this team. Like, things like Miltank can be a cleric for itself. Miltank can use Heal Bell and obviously can heal itself with Milk Drink. Superior with the Leech Seed can actually end up being reasonably hard to take down over time. But you do have things like the two steals, both of them like don't really have any form of recovery. Tentacle is another one that can be whittled down. Lando T is another one like that. So yeah, I think overall this team very, very strong. Incredible removal. I think Scoot's going to have a real fun time with Zardex this season. And I think between Zardex and Zlando T, like if one of them doesn't get you, the other one's going to get you. So yeah, really good combo, and looking forward to seeing how he does this season. So we're down to our top two. At number 2, we have Volume and the Arizona Dactyls. This is actually my week 1 opponent. So I'm not looking forward to that because this team is really strong. So what do I like about this team? I like that this team has so many sweeping options, because obviously it's got the Sand Core with Tyranitar and Excadrill, but then there's also a bunch of threatening Dragon Dancers. Like, obviously Megazard Y isn't going to Dragon Dance very often, but it can, and Sun Boosted Flare Blitz will do a ton. And then things like Feraligatr, obviously very, very threatening D-Dancer, and Tyranitar not as threatening as, for example, the Mega T-Tar, which just has that little bit of extra speed. But still, Dragon Dance T-Tar is still not to be slept on. It's still going to outspeed those base 110s when it's at +1. And, you know, like, I mean, I think we've seen there are a few teams where the speed tiers maybe aren't as good. That thing is going to be a threat against. And then, yeah, you've got bulkier defensive sweepers like Clefable and Latias can really put the work on teams if they don't have good ways of taking them down. And yeah, speaking of the bulk, there's not actually that much like natural bulk on these mons, but they're very, very good at staying alive. So what I mean by that is, like, Clefable is one of those mons where its stats aren't actually that good, but the fact that it's got Magic Guard and Unaware means that it's very, very hard to actually kill. And same with Latias. Like, Latias is not actually that bulky, but it can keep itself alive. It can support the team with Healing Wish. So yeah, there's quite a bit of longevity here. Amoonguss is probably the one, like, real thick wall. I had it in a couple of the DPL tryouts that I did recently and found it incredibly fun to use. Just like I walled an entire team. I walled a Alolan Raichu Tapu Koko team with an Amoonguss, and which was just absurd. Like, it was taking like 65, I think, from Psychic, and I was like, okay, cool. I guess I can just, you know, take that thing out in one hit, because it's, you know, it's incredibly bulky and actually has reasonable power, like with an Assault Vest set, using like Giga Drain Sludge Bomb. So yeah, no one should sleep on the Amoonguss. And it does have a kind of janky Regenerator core with Amoonguss plus Mienshao. I don't really rate Mienshao as a defensive Regenerator mon, but like the option is there, which is good. And yeah, like good webs user with Galvantula, decent spiker in the form of Frostlass. I used to be really high on Frostlass, but like I've kind of gone off it a little bit, probably the last 6 months. And then some really solid rockers like T-Tar, Clef, Excadrill. Yeah, like those are the 3 rockers. That's okay. Like, those are 3 really good rockers. I don't like, once again, it's sounding like a bit of a broken record at this point, but I don't like that T-Tar and Clef are in the same speed tier, but at least they have very, very different typings. They're very, very different things that check them. I guess Steel types actually threaten both of them, so that's bad, but you know, there's not that many offensive Steel types in the game, and particularly like offensive Steel types that outspeed those 2. I mean, one of them's already on the team in the form of Excadrill, which is the 3rd rocker, so that's okay. And yeah, no, overall I think this is a really solid team. I would be surprised if Volume doesn't go back to playoffs this season. So, moving on to our number 1 team, and it is Eoin and the Leinster Latias. I don't know if that's how you say Leinster. I apologise, Eoin. Yeah, he went 8-2 in the minors, in the D-League last season. I actually didn't note that it was D-League, but he went 8-2, lost in the quarterfinals in a bit of an upset to Johnson, who went on to actually win the whole thing. This is an incredible team. This team's borderline broken. I am really not looking forward to facing it. because this team has some really potent offensive threats and then just the fattest crap. I faced off against Owen recently, actually, in the semifinals for MLBA, and he had a similar team. He seems to draft like reasonably similar teams every time, and he drafts things like the Alomomola and the Tangrowth and the Snorlax, but he is really good at making sure that they aren't too passive for him, and the fact that he has such good offensive threats like Mega Mawile, Komodo, Aurora, Victini are all things that are going to really stop. Like, it's going to be really hard to prep for this team, because you're not only going to want to be able to tank hits from those offensive monsters, but you're also going to want to have to be able to pile pressure onto things like Tangrowth, Snorlax, Alomomola, Piloswine, and the fact that he's got the Alomomola with the Wish support to keep things like the Snorlax and the Piloswine healthy, as well as do things like bring back the Mega Mawile, bring back the Komodo late game, because particularly if you are... if you're trying to threaten out the Alomomola with, like, for example, an electric or a grass type, I mean, he can do things like Wish into Komodo, which obviously resists both those typings, Aurora, which resists the electric, Victini, which resists the grass, so, yeah, like, really good options for Aloe to Wish Pass into, and then, yeah, some really solid hazard setters, actually, no. Hazard setting is one of the things that I actually probably overrated this team a little bit on that respect. Like, Piloswine is a good rock setter, don't get me wrong, but like Komodo and Mega Mawile are not amazing rock setters in my opinion. I will admit, who has it been? Is it Asta who's been using Mega Mawile in GBA? I think he's actually been doing quite well with it as a rock setter, but like I think generally it's not great in that capacity. But yeah, Piloswine's very reliable, but like does have its limitations in certain matchups, which could be a little bit of a problem, especially because there's not really... I guess you've got Klefki as a spike setter, so a little bit of additional utility, but doesn't have like T-spikes or webs. For example, so it's a bit linear in the hazard game, but it's very non-linear outside of that, with the fact that you've got like Venomoth and Komodo as those kind of like Quiver Dance, Dragon Dance sweepers. You've got access to Prankster. I spelled Prankster wrong there, that's really annoying. With the Klefki, and yeah, and then you've got the bulky mons to really support things like the Mega Mawile and the Snorlax and the Aurora. So yeah, this team's going to be real good. It's going to be an absolute bitch to like ever knock out all 6 members, and it's got really good breaking power with things like Aurora, Victini, and the Komodo. So yeah, overall, I think this is, whilst it's probably not actually the most well-balanced team, just in terms of like the hazards and removal are a little bit limited, but it is, I think, the most defensively powerful, and it has definitely above average offensive presence. And yeah, I definitely rate those things really highly. So I expect this team to go really well. It should be a really fun season. I'm really looking forward to it. And yeah, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to comment, especially if you disagree with me. I'm sure there will be some disagreement. But yeah. That's it for CPC Majors Power Rankings. I will hopefully be back with the Minors Power Rankings. So we'll get maybe 2 videos in the space of like a week or so, which would be crazy after having spent so long not recording. But yeah, that's about it. And so until next time, peace.